Where and when you were born?
Well, Tonopah, Nevada, May 23rd, 1913.
Okay. Let's see. How big was your family?
My mother and father. I was the oldest child, and then I had two more sisters and then a brother.
Is there a big space between?
2 years each of us around.
Let's see. Were your parents both born in this country?
Yes,
And how far back does that go?
My mother's parents, the mother was born in a little town in the Italian part of Switzerland, and my mother's father was born in a town in the northern part of Italy near Genoa. But my father's folks, his father was born in the United States, but his grandfather was born in Scotland. And beyond that, I really don't know much about him.
Did you know your grandparents?
No. I knew my mother's parents, but not my father's.
We can skip all the immigration questions then.
Well, I could just tell you that my father's grandfather was immigrated to Scotland, and apparently came right to Indiana, and was one of the early settlers in a small town in Indiana. And so that about and his mother, my father's mother, was apparently her family was in this country longer, but one of the stories they tell is that she was related to the Studebakers, and the Studebakers, you know, who had the automobile, would give a picnic every year, and their family would always be invited, but they never could go because they didn't have the money to make the trip.
No car.
So yeah, so that's what happened to them on that. So that's about all I do know on the background beyond.
What kind of work did he do in Indiana?
Farming. Well, my grandfather was a doctor, and then he got into the Civil War. Well, if you're ready for that, I can go into quite a bit about
Sure.
him. All right, my father's father, this is, became a med student at Ann Arbor, Michigan. And at that time, the Civil War was just getting started. So he volunteered in the Indiana volunteer unit there from med school. And he was an orderly then. He wasn't an actual soldier, but he was an orderly. And he was in quite a few battles, and one particularly, the Union forces were losing and were retreating, and they had a lot of wounded left on the field. So he was one of the orderlies selected to stay with these wounded. So he became a prisoner of war, you see, and then he went with his wounded to whatever hospital the Confederate Army took these wounded to. But he was 7 or 8 months as a prisoner of war, and he had a diary. And so I do have that diary, which is, you know, or a copy of it, the diary, you know, which is very interesting to read. It isn't 100% complete, but there's a lot of it there, how they were, you know, so hungry. They had hardly, and of course the Southerners themselves weren't getting too much food. But, and the terrible lice that just infested them so, because they couldn't stay clean, they couldn't keep clean. And he continued, he was taken, put on a sort of cattle car with other prisoners, and he and 2 others, somehow or other, now in his story, I don't quite understand it, how they could they saw some loose planks in the bottom of this car, and they somehow saw it. And I don't know where in the world they could get a saw and do it undetected, but this is what the story says. And when it stopped to take water, you see, because it was a steam engine, and they had to stop and get water all the time, these other two fellows and he sneaked out through this. They got the board off in the floor and sneaked out through it. Excuse me.
So they got out of the cattle car.
Okay, is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, and then kind of down an embankment. And the other two fellows stood up and ran, and they were both shot. But he didn't. He lay and just rolled down and waited till the train pulled out before he stood up. But he in this diary, he wrote that he heard somebody say, well, how many were there? And answer was only 2, and we got them both. So he was able to escape. And he wandered north, you know, by checking the North Star and whatever, trying, but he was recaptured because he said he'd try and talk in a southern accent, and some Confederate soldiers came by, and so they took him back into prison. And then he was on his way to Andersonville, which is one of the most notorious prisons in the southern system. It was apparently just an awful prison. And again, he was put overnight in an outside cage, sort of, with another black man, big fellow. And at night, they left them unprotected, unguarded, because they figured they couldn't possibly get away. But there apparently was sort of a loose bar, and this strong black man and the two of them were able to pry it loose, and with this bar were able to pry open their door, and they escaped again. And so the two of them had to hide it, you know, in the daytime, and then they'd be protected or stay with other black people, and eat as best they could, I guess, you know, and what people could give them. But they just kept going north, and over the rise of one hill, they looked down, and here was his original unit, his, whatever they call it, the Indiana Volunteers or something. So he said that was the first night he'd gotten some clean clothes and was able to burn all the ones that he took off because they were full of lice, and then he got a good meal and slept in a bed for the first time in a long time. So anyway, then after the war, well then they...
What was his name?
Hmm?
What was his name?
William Wallace Spiers was his name. And he was just an orderly. Then they had him resign, and then they inducted him again, I don't know just how this is done, as an assistant surgeon. But you understand, he was still just a student, but he was given the rank of assistant surgeon, and after that he just stayed with the Union forces and worked in their hospitals. And then after the war, he went back to Ann Arbor, the med school, and got his degree. And then he was apparently very, well, his daughter, who was writing up some of this, very itchy feet. He just loved to travel. He loved to go someplace new and different. And so I think they were pretty well established in Indiana, now he and his wife. And they had 2 or 3 children by that time. But he'd heard about how terrific Kansas was. And so he went to Kansas, and he saw all these broad, huge, flat fields where you didn't have to dig up a lot of stones and boulders in order to get farmland, which is what I guess they did back in New England, and here in Indiana probably too. To get the farmland, they had to dig up a lot of boulders and things. So just loved this Kansas thing with its broad fields. And so he convinced his wife to pull up stakes, and off they go to Kansas. No wood to build houses, you see. Very difficult. And some of the newcomers were sort of digging caves in the ground. But apparently my father's mother, who he wasn't even born yet, said she was not going underground before her time. I love that statement. And so I guess the station master and his wife took them in. I think there were 3 children, and took them in, and then eventually they were able to build a very, poor makeshift of a house, I don't know, but he worked as a doctor and he worked as a farmer, and for about 20 years, and my father was born. He was the youngest of the family, and there was another daughter, I guess, born just before he was. So there were 2 more children born in Kansas. And he went through school there and went 1 year to a college, to the University of Kansas, I guess. And then there must have been there was another depression about that time. And also the Klondike Gold Rush, that was in Alaska, where that was sweeping the country. So his brother and 2 sisters went to Alaska, and he rode the rails. You know what that means? When they say that. And he got to the West Coast and settled in Nevada. And he somehow or other, I guess, he's got a little bit of an electrical engineering schooling, and so he went through and he became an electrician, and worked in one of the mines then in this town of Tonopah as their head electrician. And but I can digress a little about his sisters and his brother, an older brother, who started working for the federal government as an agricultural expert, I guess, up there in Canada. But his 2 sisters became school teachers and were teaching the Eskimos up there. And one sister was out on an island someplace, and when the June came and it was time for the end of school, she apparently was in a very small, or relatively small motorboat. I don't know, it had a motor, and the motor conked out, and they drifted for about a week. And I guess there were 3 or 4 men, and she was the only woman. And you put yourself in that spot. The kind of clothes they wore, she had just the long skirts, and they would have to do a lot of bailing with tin cans, getting the water out of this boat, and what they did to eat, and of course whatever they could do for their sanitary facilities, I don't know. But it must have been a pretty harrowing experience for her. But she said they were just about ready. Now this would have been in like the Gulf of Alaska. They were just about ready to be swept out into the Pacific Ocean when another ship came along that rescued them. So she got home. So these 2 sisters, one sister married a fellow up there, but they moved down to Southern California. And the sister that was my aunt, of course, who was the one who almost was lost in the small boat, became the head of personnel at UCLA. She not a teacher actually, but head of personnel. As I recall the story, that's what that was. And I'd have to laugh as I think back on it, because they died in their middle 50s, quite, so did my father for that matter. But I didn't really know them very well, because they lived in California, we lived in Nevada, and I saw them a few times, but not very often. And I always thought they were so fuddy-duddy, you know how young kids are, and so And when later, when I learned of some of these experiences that they had,
I never talked to him about them.
no,
himself,
I didn't
yeah.
know anything about it then. No, and you know, I didn't really have enough sense to ask them about their grandparents and a little more about my father. I never asked him. He wasn't very anxious to talk about it because again, now see, his father then decided he wanted to go to Oklahoma. He really didn't want to stay in Kansas anymore. See, they'd been there about 20 years. But his wife had done enough. And she wanted to put, and here she is, the mother of all these grown children. So she must have been, well into her 50s or more. Yeah, I guess she wouldn't have been 60 yet. And she had these two daughters who were living in Southern California, and so if they were going any place, that's where she wanted to go. So he went to Oklahoma and got some more land, I guess, and wanted her to come, and no way was she going to go. So he divorced her. And after a couple of years, or some thereabout, he married another woman, much, much younger, and they had a son after a year or so. Let's see, the son was born, I've got that fact someplace, anyway, in like 1907, and he was born, he died a few months afterward, 8 months after that son was born. So,
Oh, your grandfather did.
he was about 66 when he died.
And about what year did they get divorced?
Well, it must have been after 1900.
Early 1900s.
Yeah, the early 1900s. Had to be. Yeah, I do have those figures exact, but that's about what it was. But I picked some of that up from we got the papers from the Army, and she had written in for a pension to help her with this son, who was the son of a veteran. And I think she got like $6 or $7 a month, at that time to help her take care of
This
this
was his second
baby.
wife.
Pardon?
The second wife, Ruth?
Yeah, the second wife, right, And then my father's mother died just in the month I was born, I think, because I know he couldn't go to her funeral because I was either imminent, and that would have been like May of 1913. So
Well, did she go to Southern California?
oh
to
yeah,
be with
she'd
her
been
daughters?
there quite a while. Yeah, she'd been there quite a few years. So it was kind of interesting. And then the oldest sister, the one who wrote up a lot of the stories, that I was kind of relating to you, she went to teach from Kansas. She went to teach in the Dakotas someplace, and again, she was just a little tiny thing, and as I thought she was such a little old fuddy-duddy, and so she tells about the time she and some friends decided they were going to go to Yellowstone. And so she bought herself a little pony to sort of toughen herself up for the trip, you see, because they went in buckboards and horses. And so she went from North Dakota to Wyoming on horseback.
Wow.
Well, after all, that's pretty rugged, and then she married a man who was in the Indian service, and he was superintendent of various Indian reservations. So that's the way. And then she got back to Los Angeles, died there. She was the oldest of the whole family, the oldest daughter, the oldest child, and lived the longest. She was in her early 70s when she died, and the others had all died earlier. So that about takes care of what I know of.
So your father ended up in Tonopah.
Uh-huh.
Because he had been riding the rails. And
Yeah, well, he came there, you see, and got a
met
job.
your mother there or somewhere else?
Well, yeah, then my mother had been born in Eureka, Nevada, and then her family, she had two older brothers, and they had to start looking for work. None of them went to high school. She's the only one, because they had to go out and work. My grandfather, was a teamster, they called him. He had this huge wagon and horses that hauled heavy loads and whatever was needed. And he was injured. I don't know if the wagon ran over him or something, but anyway, he could never work again. And so my poor little grandmother had to take in washing and go to people's houses and work and things like that. And she had these 4 children to feed and raise, so they had a very rough life. And the boys then had to, at the end of school, or before school was over, they'd leave probably in April and go out on ranches in Nevada there, where they had sheep, and sheep mainly, I think it was, and work all summer, mainly just for their food, and sometimes they might get a pair of shoes. I don't think they'd ever get any money, but something like that. And then they wouldn't come back until October, so they would have missed a lot of school, but they were always telling me that in just a relatively few weeks they were back at the top of their class again, that somehow or other they had a lot of pride, and they worked very hard to kind of get up, and they used to, in those days, they don't do it now, and I'm glad, but they would list the students in the order in which they were standing in the class, and so they managed to get up to the top after a few weeks, really, a month or so, after being a couple of months, minus the schooling. But they never did, they couldn't go on. If they had had a chance to get an education, life would have been much different for them. Because, but as it was, they just had to work hard. They worked on the railroad, they worked on the highways, they worked hauling water, because of course in lots of those places, water wasn't piped in. They had to haul it in big barrels. One uncle, my mother's youngest brother, worked as a young man on this 20 mule team borax.
Oh, really?
You've seen that 20 mule team program, and he worked keeping the mules watered and things like that, out of Death Valley. So anyway, but one uncle worked in the mines as an actual, and he got silicosis because of it, where they breathe in that dust and dirt. And of course, in those days, there was nothing like workers' compensation. You know what that is, don't you? And no pensions, no unemployment insurance, of course, nothing like that. So, and this little town, this little mining town of Tonopah, where I was raised, I'll never forget this. I'll remember it even now. These poor old miners that had been working for several years, quite a few years, way down in the mines, you see, because these mines were, the shafts were sunk thousands of feet, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 feet. And then the tunnels would go out at different levels while they'd try and find the rich ore, with the silver, mainly silver. Tonopah was a very rich silver producing town. It actually, at one time, they had more silver. It was a richer find, more silver than any other place in the world. Didn't last too many years, but for the time, it was. But at any rate, then these men, we would call it miner's consumption, thinking it was tuberculosis, and they called it miner's con. And these poor men would be on the sidewalks in downtown part of the town, sitting there coughing and coughing and coughing. I'll never forget it. It was just terrible to see them. And of course, there was no government help for them at all. There was kind of like a dole, I guess, in some cases. And then, of course, there were widows that had young children, where the husbands had died because of this ailment. And, but we never thought of the fact that they might have been a little poorer than we were. Everybody was in the same boat, and we never gave that a thought, you know. And I don't recall that their clothing was any different, really, than what I had. I don't know how the mother did it, but somehow or other. I can remember one family particularly where she had to just go out and work however she could, and she had these 3 kids, 1 boy and 2 girls. So at any rate, it shows you how the social consciousness of the people have improved, you know, because of that. Well, I don't know. What else now can we say?
What was your town like?
Well, it had about 2,000-3,000 people when I was there. It had been much bigger earlier on. It was a much more, when the mining was much better. But by the time I was born, it had begun to fall off. But they still had enough work. And it wasn't until 1929, when the crash came, that the price of silver went so low that the mining companies couldn't afford to do any more mining. So the mines all closed down, and my father didn't have a job anymore. And he was about 50 at that point, and sick besides. He wasn't well. So we just, you know, we had no place to go. He tried to get work in Southern California and didn't find anything. So that's when we finally had to move to Fair Oaks and move in on my mother's people. It's just that's all we could do, you see.
And how old were you at the time?
Her mother and 2 brothers took us in. Family of 6, you know, and so we helped build. We built another house that was bigger, and my brother was 14, and in the 7th or 8th grades, I guess, someplace. Margaret was 16. No, I guess, no, when we first moved there, my brother would have been about 11, and Margaret would have been just 13. And then Dorothy was a sophomore in high school, and I had just graduated from high school. So then I started Sacramento Junior College, and Dorothy finished high school in Sacramento by commuting with some friends who were going to that high school, because we always thought we'd maybe move out and live in a house someplace in Sacramento, which of course never happened.
I thought you had gone to San Juan High School.
I never went as a student. No, I taught,
Oh.
but I never went as a student.
I see.
No.
So were there no high schools around to go to? They had to go to
Honey, I
Sacramento?
can't
They had to go to Sacramento to go to high school?
Didn't have to, no.
There was high schools around.
Oh, yeah, there was one high school. And, but our thinking was, you see, is that we'd be moving into Sacramento, because my father was still living, and we didn't realize he was as sick as he was. And so that was the theory, you see. But the other 2 kids just went to schools in the neighborhood, you see. And it is interesting that one high school, and it covered a very, very large area, and mostly big farmland, you see, wheat and oats and that sort of thing, and orchards, because we had an orange orchard, actually.
What high school was that?
But this was San Juan High School, see, and it went up close to Folsom, took in Orangevale. Orangevale students came to San Juan. Fair Oaks students came to San Juan. It went down to Grant High School, you see, so wherever that demarcation was. But it was a huge area. And when I started to teach there in 1935, I think there were something like 350, 400 students. And when I left in 1943, I think there were 650 students in the one high school in that huge area, Then when the war came and all the influx of people came in no time there were, 4 or 5 more high schools, and each of them with 1,000 to 2,000 students. So look at the difference in just that short period of time, really.
So, okay, now you ended up going to, what junior?
Sacramento Junior
Junior
A
College.
Sacramento Junior College, and then I went to Berkeley. And then I got a teaching certificate credential down there.
So how long were you in school for? From
5 years.
5 years.
And I took summer schools in there and finished up 5 years. And very lucky that I got a job, because in the mid-30s, you know, teachers were taking office jobs all over the place, if they could even find them. So I was just very, very lucky. And so I taught there for 8 years, and left to come to San Francisco and meet the Felsos and the Averys and the
So what was teaching like? Were most of the other teachers there women too?
Oh, no, there were men and women, you see. Lots of men. See, this was in high school. And they had the man in science and math and shop and agriculture. You see.
What did you teach?
I taught Spanish. And then I later went more into counseling. And I taught some arithmetic, and I taught a few, I don't know, some other things. They just put you in wherever, and typing, wherever you
I didn't know you had gone into counseling.
Yeah, toward the end, the last 2 or 3 years, it was mainly, I still taught, but not as many classes.
So, what was the most significant event in your growing up years that affected you the most in the way that, like, what made you decide to go to school and you decided to be a teacher?
Well, it's kind of hard to define that, you know. It's because at first, when I first got into high school, I had said, no, I don't want to go to college. I'll just get an office job, and I don't want to go to college. And I was a junior in high school before all of a sudden, and don't ask me why, I thought, no, I want to change. And I was about 6 weeks into the semester when I made that decision. So I had to get into a class or two late, like take a history class, for instance, or something. But I don't know really, I can't tell you why. But I just decided all of a sudden I did want to go to college and probably would want to teach. But I don't know why.
Did it have anything to do with economics? Did you want to?
No, because at that time, you know, the depression hadn't come, and the crash of the stock market hadn't hit yet. Well, we didn't, you know, we weren't rolling, you know, we weren't affluent by any means, but I would get just a job. We always knew we had to have work. We'd have to go to work. We'd have to earn our living. And there was just no question about that. But I don't think there's any real reason for it. That I can think of. I just thought I'd rather do it, you know. I'd like it better, I guess.
So you didn't come from a family then that encouraged you to go to school, or?
Oh, well, they certainly have encouraged me, yes. And I remember my father saying they knew someone who had gone from this town, and she had gone into mathematics, and was teaching mathematics, and she was making $200 a month. And by golly, that was fabulous, because I don't know if he ever got more than $300 a month, and he raised his family, you know, the time he was working. But I don't know. I know they were wanting me to do that, but I wasn't being pressured, you know, really. But
Well, there
always
was talk about it in the house.
Hmm?
There was talk about it.
Oh yes, always. We were going on to school beyond, so we could get a job. We weren't just going to stop at high school.
So there was talk about careers rather than just taking a
I
job.
guess you could say that, I guess you could say that.
What was college like when you were there? What was-
Well, it's kind of hard, I guess, not having any other college to
That's true.
compare it with. But junior college was, to me, just kind of a glorified high school. And I think I was always felt afterwards that I wished I had started as a freshman at the university. But you see, I couldn't have afforded it anyway. I always had to work for my board and room. I lived with families and helped with the cooking and the housekeeping and the baby tending, you see. To get my room and board, that was the big expense as you lived away from home. And we couldn't have gone had I not done something like that. But I was always lucky, and it worked out all right. And I had nice people, you know, that I worked for, so I had time to study. But I wasn't I studied, and I didn't do a lot of outside fooling around, you know. I wasn't real social. And so then when I got to Cal, you know, I had good friends, and had a friend who was in a fraternity there, and we'd go dancing in San Francisco and go back and forth on the ferry, you know, but it was just ordinary. Everybody was in the same boat. Nobody had much money. And when the first year I went to Berkeley was in 1930, what would it have been, 32 or 32. Yeah, 33 it was, because Roosevelt became president in 1933, and he declared the bank holiday, and I remember that very plainly, because I was a junior in college at that time, and it was the bank holiday, and nobody had any money.
I just learned about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You'd heard about that?
We just learned about that in my
Oh,
history class
oh,
last
uh-huh.
week.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, here's somebody who remembers that day.
Yeah. Well, I never had any money anyway. My folks would give me enough money to buy my student body ticket and my books. And then I would usually get $10 a month from the people I worked for. But then I guess when I went to Berkeley, the depression was getting deeper, and they cut me down to 5. And then later on, just my board and room, no money. But my mother was very frugal, and she managed to have enough money so I could buy some clothes and books. But I certainly didn't have any money to do anything extra.
Well, so you taught at San Juan for 8 years,
Mhm.
and then what did you do?
So then I just decided I wanted to change. And my sister at that time was in San Francisco, and I had always liked San Francisco. And I knew that San Francisco was to find a teaching job in San Francisco was impossible, because it was the super job to have, you know, and I just wouldn't be, you know, it would have plenty of people there already. And so I just came down and stayed with my sister for a little while, and then, you know, I don't remember whether I got the job in Oakland and then went to Eunice's, or whether I was at Eunice's already.
I heard that you had a job and then needed a place to live.
No, that might have
That's
been
what
it
I heard.
then. Yes, because and it was in Oakland that I got this job as working in the hiring office for people at a shipyard. And I didn't know the first thing about it, not the first thing about it. And you'd have these long applications that they'd have to fill out, and they would say, I'm an electrician, I'm a ship joiner, I didn't even know what that was, and you know, I was to do all of these things, and on most of the words I didn't even know what they were. But I soon learned, you know. And you took them at their word and sent them to what we call the yard, and the foreman then could talk to them and decide whether they were worth hiring or not. But you see, they were hiring almost anybody. There were so few capable people, trained people, because they were all in the service. They'd all gone to war. And so they were getting all these people from the South, from the Midwest, who just hadn't worked in a shipyard, hadn't worked at a craft.
So what year was it?
That would have been in 1943, late in 43. October, maybe, something like that, of 1943. And so I lived there. I lived with Eunice. This would be your great aunt, I guess, huh? Yeah. And so then I got a job. After that, you see, in 1945, shipbuilding was coming down completely. They were closing the shipyards and cutting way back. But a friend of mine knew somebody who was in the state, what we call the Industrial Welfare Division, where they enforced the laws for women and minors in various workplaces. And so they suggested that I go and interview for that job, which I did, and I got that job. And the interesting thing about that, though, is with state work, you know, you have to pass an examination, get on a list. But of course, again, they needed people, and so you started to work on sort of a temporary basis. Then you took the exam. Well, so by the time you were ready to take the exam, you'd already done enough of the job, you see, so you were able to know what to study, how to answer your questions, and it was a big help. But the interesting thing was, the law said that anybody who got a job during the war, on these civil service exams during the war, could only have them, in a sense, temporary. Because when these service people started coming back, they would have a right to also take those exams, and you'd have to retake your exam again. But of course, it was such an uneven thing, because we'd already been working 2 or 3 years at the job, and we knew it cold, you know, in a sense. So we had such an advantage of somebody coming in. So for a little while, the new people coming back trying to compete would have a terrible time. But, you know, later on it all evened out and smoothed out, and they would, you know, then there was more chance for them to find a niche. But so I worked at that job for about 8 years, but I never did much like it. It was one of these things that required, it was a very important job, in my opinion, and a very necessary job. But it required a lot of inspections, and it's just personally, it's something I didn't care to do, you see. As I say, it was a very necessary thing, and if you didn't make those inspections, there'd be working conditions that would never be discovered, that needed to be changed, you see. And then
So
there was...
what were the major problems then?
For
women and children, you're saying?
Yeah, women and minors. And it was poor sanitary facilities, lots of overtime, which was not legal in those days. It's more so now. And just, you know, just working conditions, the actual, you know, there was requirements for women to have a cot, because, you know, there's plenty of times women have to go lie down. They have cramps and whatnot, you see. And lots of employers wouldn't supply that. And their toilet facilities would be very bad. And they wouldn't keep track of their hours, and then you wouldn't know whether they were getting the minimum wage or not. and we had to do a lot of auditing of the payrolls to determine whether they were getting their minimum wage that they at least should have been getting. So that's the sort of thing you did, but it's just something that personally wasn't, it was a little distasteful to me, but it was an important thing. It was very necessary. But then I was able to take this other examination for what we call a deputy labor commissioner, and I liked that much better, and I got on the list, and that was when it was strange, because those two divisions were sort of side by side. One was mostly women doing the work, and the other was mostly men. The deputy labor commissioners were mostly men, holding hearings on disputed wage claims, which could be for not the minimum wage, because they would probably come under the Industrial Welfare Commission, but for all the wage agreements that were in excess of the minimum wage. But it was mostly women, all women actually, in the one division, and all men. So the women coming into the men's division wasn't easy, and the men didn't like it. Plain and simple, didn't like it. But there were a few women there already who had, in fact, there were two, who had been on the same job I was in and had gone ahead. And of course, in San Francisco, the men who were working as deputy labor commissioners got to know us because we held joint hearings very frequently. So, you know, you can, then they could feel differently towards you once they get to know you. But I got on the list and almost got a job once, about 2 years on the list. And the labor commissioner had a woman who was a deputy, who was his assistant. And she, let's see, this labor commissioner all of a sudden died, boom, just like that. And she, see, there was a position just about open that I was going to have. But then, when he died, she was afraid that a new labor commissioner would appoint his own deputy assistant. And then she wanted this open position for herself, so that when that happened, she'd have a job to go back to, which is what she would have been qualified for. So that stayed vacant a long time, and I didn't get it, because she worked as the acting labor commissioner, you see. But she wanted to save that position for herself, just in case. And I don't blame her in a way. I mean, it was just the way things went. So then the next opening that came up was for a job that would have been in Eureka, not San Francisco. And that job would have entailed doing a lot of work with the loggers and that sort of thing. So they decided a woman shouldn't have that job. But they wanted me to say no, I wouldn't take it. But I'd gotten some counseling on that, and under state service, you don't waive a job, really, because it counts as a waiver, you know, and then you only have a chance for 2 more, or some, I've forgotten now just what that was. But I said, no, I'd take it. Surprised them all to pieces. So they had to reject me, you see, which was better in that case for me. So anyway, this particular woman who was still working as an assistant labor commissioner said, the very next job that's open is going to be yours. See, when she had to turn me down for this Eureka job. So then, no list stays more than 4 years. It was in those days anyway. And then they throw it out and make everybody take a new examination. And I was getting kind of discouraged because I didn't know if I wanted to take a new examination or not. But just really at the last minute, and it was practically the last minute, somebody in Los Angeles retired, and this woman made the appointment of me to go to Los Angeles. And practically that same moment, a new labor commissioner was appointed. So she couldn't no longer be acting labor commissioner, since she had been the main boss, because there was no real labor commissioner, but there was one appointed at just about that time. And he was from the operating engineers as a labor man, and I know perfectly well that he wouldn't have agreed to appoint a woman. I mean, he was male-oriented. He came from a male-dominated labor union, and it's just what he would have done. I mean, it would make sense. So she just took it upon herself to make that appointment, you see. So she vindicated herself as far as I was concerned. And then this labor commissioner always said afterwards, you know, Ruth, you know I'd appointed you, you know, and I know perfectly well. He knew perfectly well he wouldn't have, but anyway.
How did she feel that knowing because she was a woman, she would
But-
never get his job? There was no chance that she could have.
Hardly ever. I mean, there might have been a rare chance, but you would know that she wouldn't get a political appointment because she didn't work in politics, you see. Those labor commissioners are all political appointees, you
It wasn't
see.
the fact that she was a woman.
No, well, it might have something to do with it, but that basically wasn't it. I think
Okay.
basically is that she wasn't political,
Okay.
you see. That was basically it. So anyway, I worked at that job about 19 years, I guess, and then I retired.
Okay. So do you speak English?
Now, honey,
Yes.
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, one of my questions on this list is, do you speak English? And I think yes.
Hopefully.
So did you ever feel any sexism in your job that you?
Oh, well, I think so, just as I was telling you, you know, that that would have been, now as far as state service is concerned, you see, which is a lot different from other places of employment probably, you got the same pay for the job. The fact that you were a woman made no difference as far as the pay was concerned.
But getting the job.
But getting the job in some of those higher jobs, probably, you know, they felt that some women couldn't do it. Now, since then, of course, there are a lot more women in those positions that I had been in. But at that time, it was not, you know, they were mostly men. And I know this. I know when those men in the Los Angeles office knew that a woman was coming down to take that vacancy, I could feel it when I got there. This standoffishness, sort of, this feeling that, well, I probably wouldn't do the job and they'd probably have to do most of it for me, you know, and things like that. So, of course, you just have to get in and do it twice as well as they did, you know. But after, and it didn't worry me. I don't say it didn't bother me, it didn't worry me, because I knew that I could show them that I could do it, and that would be it. But that, as far as money is concerned, if you got the job, you got the same pay, because that was the way the civil service worked. But that probably isn't true, and wasn't true with private industry.
When you were teaching, did you feel you had an equal?
No, I don't think so. I think women always were accepted in the teaching profession, you know, as co-equals with equals, I guess.
Well, I had a book written in,
Pardon, you what?
I had a book written in early 1900s. It was a report to the San Francisco Board of Education.
Uh-huh.
And they had a chart of salaries, and the women made exactly half of what the men made.
That may have been, but of course when I was teaching, you can't really make a comparison, because salaries were so lousy anyway, and nobody was getting much money. It may be,
But it
but
was
I
equal?
don't think I knew. No, I don't know about that. See, as far as the men, some of them may have been working there longer. They were in the sciences and in the higher math classes. Maybe they felt and were getting higher pay. But I'm sure there was one woman there who'd been there quite a while, that she probably was getting equal pay to what some of those men were. But you didn't know really what other people were getting, so I couldn't tell you. But as I say, it was in the middle of the Depression, and nobody was getting much money anyway. And in our area, the school board were all mainly big farmers, and they weren't interested in raising taxes on their farmland. So the school board was not all that anxious to raise pay either, you see. So, but of course, since then, teachers' salaries have gone up. I got $100 a month my first job as a teacher. You know, it's pretty good. And I guess when I left in 8 years, I think it was 160. And that was on a 12-month basis though. You know, lots of schools gave just 9 or 10 months. And I know Helen and Ben Bernard, this was friends of the family who worked in Santa Monica. And they were paid only on a 10-month basis. But of course, I mean, they were just like everybody else. They didn't save quite enough to get through those 2 months that they weren't getting paid. But I think what Ben did, he'd get other jobs. That's what they do frequently. Those teachers would try and get other jobs. But this was in the 20s, and that was a little different, you see. The Depression hadn't started yet.
So you didn't get out of teaching because you just liked it?
No, I just wanted to do something different. I liked teaching, I really did. I enjoyed it. But I was living at home, and it was a small place, and I just felt that I wanted to try something, you know, change my locale, really, mainly, is what I wanted. And of course, then it was so easy to get any kind of a job. Any kind of a job. Anybody could get a job of any kind. There was just no need to worry about whether you were going to find another job because you knew you would. See, it's a lot different as to whether you want to quit one job, you know.
I remember waking up on a morning, I think I'll go get a job today, coming home with a job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we talked about your business life. Let's go to your personal life, I guess.
Not much there, hon.
Well, what was your family like? Were you a close family, or do you remember?
Oh yeah, yeah. My mother held us all together pretty much. You see, she became a widow at age 47, and she, you know, I mean, we knew we kind of had to support each other and help each other, and so we always did stay together. And then when my sisters and brother married, my brother went into the service. But, you know, they started having children, and I became very involved in their children. And so I don't know what else you want to know along there.
Well, what was your parents' relationship like?
Well, it was good, you know. They got along very well, and they thought much the same way, you know. And it was always the wife stayed at home and did the cooking and raised the kids, and the father did the work. And but he was always wonderful with us and did a lot of things for us, and he was very good with making things, you see. And so it was just the routine thing, the way every family did, you see. They had the mother and the father and the kids, and they each did what they needed to do.
So do you think that stereotype changed? Because since did most of your family go with that same, the mother stayed home and the father worked, or
Well,
did your family change that?
Yes, although I had one sister who was a nurse, and she, after how the children were, what, 14, 16, maybe the youngest was a little younger, she went back to nursing. But when they were small, she didn't work. And my younger sister never did work while she was raising her kids. And my brother's wife never did work. So, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah. Were most of your friends single or married?
Most of them were married, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how did that affect you? Did you feel out of place or anything?
No, I never did. I never did. Those that I stayed friends with them, you know, and would see them, and they'd invite me over and things like that. It never seemed to make any difference.
So can you name one thing why you didn't fit the mold of the rest of your family, or? I mean.
Well, it's kind of hard to say. You mean it's why I never married?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why you didn't go with that same stereotype?
It just never worked out, put it that way. I just can't really say. It just never did work out. Whether there were times when, you know, I had some nice relationships, but somehow it just didn't work out. It's hard to say. It's one of those things.
And you don't regret that at all?
Well, I will say this, yes. I think that a happy life, a happy married life is the best way to live. I don't think there's any question about it. But if you don't find that ability, I mean, if you don't find that right happiness, and I've seen so much of that, it's terrible. So, no, there's no question that I do feel that the best way to live is in a happy married situation.
Okay. So, let's see. How about your religious views? Did you family practice religion?
Yeah, my mother was a Catholic, and I was raised a Catholic, and I just fell away from it. When I was in college, I was in my upper years in college, I somehow, it just wasn't giving me anything anymore. I didn't seem to want to keep up with it.
Did you think about it much?
Not a great deal, except that it just didn't, the word turn me on isn't a good word, excuse me. Can you turn it off? I'm going to drink water.
So let's see, what were we talking about? Religion, I guess.
Now, honey, your voice.
Oh, sorry. So you didn't miss your religion?
Never.
Never?
No, I have my own personal philosophy, which I just have figured it out. It's the golden rule, you know, and you just do what's right and treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. And
Would you consider yourself a humanist then?
well, I don't know that much about humanism. Yes, I think I'm probably more nearly that, if anything. I've never studied it. I don't know exactly what they use for a definition for it, but...
I always think of it as be kind to your fellow man,
That's
just for
right.
that reason,
Yeah.
not because
That's
you're
right.
going to have to pay for it
It makes a
later.
better world. It's, at any rate, I don't feel that I need a formalized religion for that,
Or do you feel like anybody's watching over you and
No.
checking on you?
No, no. Do you?
No.
No.
So, how would you rate your educational experience?
Well, I think it's a little above average. I don't think it's super. I know it isn't super because I've never gone beyond that degree, you know, I got the AB and teacher's credential, but I didn't get a master's or anything beyond. So, however you would rate that, you know, in educational ladders, so to speak.
So were you satisfied with the education that they provided you in school?
Oh, I think so. I think I could have gotten more out of it myself, but I don't know that it would. The only thing that I've often thought I wished had been different is a little better aptitude testing, a little better counseling for me, because I was 2 or 3 years into, 2 years I guess, really, into college, and I felt, well, I'm really in the wrong slot. But I felt, well, it's too late. I can't be wasting any more time, let's see, and I've got to get out of here and get a job. And so, but had I had a little better aptitude testing and counseling to begin with, I might have found something that I would have preferred.
You don't know what that is? Yep.
Yeah, I'd have gone into some sort of health work, nurses work. I thought that I might have gone into public health work, something like that.
So,
Years ago, you told me several times that you were disappointed in the education in those days because they taught so much by rote. That they taught so much by rote compared to today's.
Well, this was true with junior college. I don't know that it was that true with the university, but it was true, I think, in the junior college, and certainly true in high school. I think there's no question about that. Mm-hmm.
looking back on your life, is there anything you would have done differently?
Well, as I was mentioning to you there, if I'd kind of gotten into a little different profession,
Yeah.
I might have felt a little bit, but I was, you know, fairly satisfied with the way things turned out, and I made what I felt was a fairly decent living, you know, and was able to get along.
So tell me about your travels. You said you went to Greece?
Yes, I've been quite a few places, actually. I don't know where to start or how to do it, you know, but one of the nicer trips, it was after I retired. I took the first time I'd been on a real cruise, and it was a cruise on the Mediterranean, which we flew to Greece, and then boarded this cruise ship, and went to Crete, and then to Egypt, and got up to the pyramids. Didn't go beyond that, unfortunately, but the museum there in Cairo, and that's where I'd seen the Tut artifacts. It was in this museum in Cairo, but it was an old museum that had been built by the British when they were still, overlording Egypt. And when I saw it here in San Francisco, quite a few years later.
Dana saw it too.
Oh, you saw it?
Mm-hmm.
My, such a difference, because the Egyptian museum was dark, and the exhibits weren't displayed nearly as nicely, and you had all these, if you've never been in as a tourist, you don't know this, but you go in groups, and your leader is over here, and then another group is over here, and sometimes another one is over here, and everybody's talking, and you can't always hear. And they're talking, let's say they're at a display, and they're telling you about it. And by the time maybe that you get up to really see that display, if you're in the back of the line, kind of, they're off to something else. or there's another tour leader over here talking. So sometimes it can be very distracting and difficult. So that's why it was so wonderful to see that particular exhibit in San Francisco, because they allowed only just a few people in at a time. You know, I mean, they measured you so that you got in just a certain number, and they had it so that you had lots of room, lots of light, lots of ability to see and read and learn what they were showing you and telling you. So that was really great. But at any rate, this is what happens in many of the tours that you take. You see, you go on to see something and you don't always get right up to get the full meat of it.
Do you think your love of travel is in your genes from your grandfather?
Who knows?
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
Well, it could be, yeah. Yeah, uh-huh. But I didn't want to move someplace else, see, which is what he wanted to do. He wanted to pick up and move someplace else. But at any rate, this was a great trip, really, because then we went to Israel, and we docked at Haifa, and then we took a bus trip to Galilee one day. And, you know, here I walked in the little Sea of Galilee and sunk down to my calf in the mud that was there. And we went to a kibbutz, and it was just at the time, well, I guess it would be the Syrians. See, Galilee is right at the north of Israel, and I guess it's Syria, was bombing them all the time at that time. And they had these bomb shelters very close to where the children went to school, so that if a bombing raid started, the children could get into the bomb shelters at least right away. And they had we had lunch there. And in a kibbutz, you know how a kibbutz is run?
Sort of.
It's really a true form of communism, really true form of communism, because people do what they're told, and everybody has a job, and everybody gets paid the same. And the fellow who drove our bus was an Arab. He wasn't a Jewish fellow. And he had been in a kibbutz, and he said it was fine. And then he said he was a young man, he wasn't married. They had to wait on a line in order to get one of the 2 or 3 cars that were available to where they could go on a weekend into town, you see, on their day off. But they would have women that would be only take care of everybody's children, and that would be that woman's job or several women's job. Then in this restaurant we went to, there'd be certain people that would be assigned to doing the cooking and the waiting and the cleaning up or whatever, and then other people would be assigned into the fields, you see, to do that work. Regardless, a lot of those people were engineers, you know, were well educated, but in the kibbutz, everybody had a job for the good of everybody, supposedly, and everybody got paid the same. Everybody was given the same kind of clothes to wear. Everybody was given the same chance to use the automobile. They'd sign up and get it, and then they'd get to the bottom of once they got to the top, then they'd go back to the bottom of the list for wait their turn for the next time. So this fellow was telling us that after a bit he decided he didn't want that anymore. But this is what a kibbutz is, and I guess it must be that at the beginning the Israeli government felt that to develop the farmland especially, see, because the Arabs had depleted the land a lot, and I'm surprised because during the Dark Ages, learning was kept alive in the Arab countries. I'm sure you know that they were the ones that kept the mathematics, the science, the astronomy, and that sort of thing where in the Dark Ages it was lost in Europe. So at any rate, but here they apparently did not do a proper job in maintaining the land, and they cut down all the trees. There weren't any trees in Israel, and they had to reinvigorate the soil. They had to redo things like that. So that's why these kibbutzes, I think, I'm not that well read on it, but to some extent that's it. They had to really get this sort of thing going again. And when we were there, the farmlands, some of them looked beautiful. You could tell, you'd stand on a hill and look over, and they were really lovely. So they were making progress. And of course, I saw in this country many of the Jewish people paid money to send trees over. The trees would get planted, which is what they needed to get going again. So at any rate, we took this one trip to Galilee, and then the next day we went into Jerusalem. And my disappointment there was that they were, with us, they stressed the Christian aspect. But there's a wonderful museum there, Jewish, and they didn't take us to it, we didn't get to it. And it was all, for instance, we walked down the Via Dolorosa, which is where the signs of the cross, and they pointed out the various signs. Now, of course, I take some of this with a little grain of salt, but supposedly some of these places where I've kind of forgotten. Did you ever learn the Stations of the Cross? I did, but I've kind of forgotten.
I think, my mother hated doing it so much.
And
Going through town or something.
Pardon?
I think my mother just hated it so much she didn't, I think that rubbed off on me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. But at least, I'm glad I maybe had that early education. But we were shown, and then of course, just a little bit before, a couple of years before, the war liberated the Wailing Wall, and so we got to see the Wailing Wall, and it was being used the way the Jews do. You see, they go to it and they put little prayers, little supplications in the. Off again. I'm sorry about this, but when I talk a lot, So anyway, do you want to hear some more about that?
Well, we were starting to talk about the history of the other countries. I'm interested to know your view of American history. I mean, you grew up through all the different changes in society and politics and everything, and I'd love to hear about what you thought about all that.
It's changed a lot. When
When
I was in high school, and even when I was in college, I wasn't the least bit interested in politics. I didn't want to hear about it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. It was going to happen. It was going to happen, and I didn't really, at that age, and I really just plain wasn't interested. Except I was interested. See, Roosevelt was elected. I was a senior in college, and that was one of the first things about politics that really was impressing me at that time. See, because earlier than that, although I just didn't pay that much attention to it. It didn't mean that much to me. I was in a secure home. I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from or anything, and you just went from day to day and didn't think about these things, and in my family it wasn't discussed. Now some families, I'm sure, talk politics, but not in my family, so I just never got into it. and so it was this later, you see, that I started getting in. So I've been a Democrat all my life, I think, because Roosevelt being a Democrat, and he was important to me at that time, so. But as far as you know, and then of course in the job I had, social legislation began to be important, and otherwise I might not have really paid too much attention to that. But the need for laws to protect the lower echelon of citizens, and I still believe that. I think that it's very important. I think government can do a lot in that respect, rather than figuring that everybody's off for himself. And I know right now it's
Or dependent on charity.
yeah, and it's distresses me very much. I just can't see any reason for all this homelessness, and I can't believe that there isn't some way to make things so that that wouldn't happen. And also, I'm very disappointed in the way the drug problem is being handled, and the way the crime problem is being handled. In my opinion, it's so very important, as far as drugs are concerned, to somehow do away with the profit motive. I think if that could happen, and if people who were pushing drugs didn't get paid so well for it, then it wouldn't happen some way or other. And it's so apparent to me that putting people in jail isn't doing it. And then the same way with crime prevention in other aspects. I think it's so very important to find ways to prevent it and not to incarcerate after it happens.
Is that why Roosevelt was so important to you, do you think? Because he was so active and trying to
Probably that he did something. You see, he was in office just a day or two, or barely a week, when he started doing something. He had this bank holiday. The CCC was so very important, because here were all these young boys who couldn't find work. Work wasn't available. He did something about it, you see. Well, it made an impression on me, really did.
How much of a fight did he have to?
That then apparently he got these things through pretty well, because he did it, you know. Some of them it could be by executive order. They didn't have to go through the Congress. And so he did it, you see.
So now the president has to go through Congress
Well,
board? Is it?
there are certain executive orders that he can do. I'm not that knowledgeable about just which are which and not, but a lot of it has to go through Congress, and Congress, for where Roosevelt was concerned, at first anyway, I think he was able to do that, although he had a lot of trouble with Congress, you know, in his day too. And of course the main one is when he decided the Supreme Court, and you've probably read about this, was ruling against what he wanted. He decided he was going to add 2 more people to the Supreme Court, and that, you know, he just didn't get away with that at all. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How affected were you living in California by the people coming in from the Dust Bowl weekend?
Well, not really. I mean, I read about it, you know, but it didn't affect me. It wasn't where I was, you might say, because I heard about Okies, but I never was around them. I never, so I just didn't know much about it. It didn't touch me. So I didn't feel sorry for them, really. I didn't
Did
really
you feel a prejudice about them now?
Probably a
The
little.
things you heard?
Probably a little, but I didn't actively have it touch me, you see, because I wasn't living where they were. I don't know really, had I been, how I might have reacted or what I might have done about it.
So living in San Francisco, what kind of, what was the ethnicity mix during?
Well, again, I never did think about this. I mean, I accepted everybody for what they were. I never did. Now, in San Francisco, in those days, there was a lot of Irish, and at one time, people thought that was different, but not when I was there, you know. It was Mexicans, but I wasn't around them that much. I wasn't involved with them. And I never thought, frankly, do you know that I wasn't, when did I really begin to realize that people thought Jewish people were different? I was out of college, really.
Huh.
Now, in high school, we had 2 Jewish families. I knew they were Jewish, but I mean, I didn't know that they were supposed to be different.
That's
Right.
how I was about Mexican people. I had
Yeah.
no idea that there was prejudice about Mexican people until the 1970s. When
Uh-huh.
a Mexican girl was complaining to me about something, and I said,
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out what she was talking about.
I know, I had very little experience with black people, you know, so I didn't have this feeling of, they're so different. You didn't want, you know, you kept them in a separate part.
So was this maybe your family's ideas, or was it just your whole community didn't really
It was
recognize?
just this place where we were living. We weren't involved in it. I think that must be true with a lot of people in the Midwest who don't have the different ethnicities at all, especially of what we think of as minorities.
I went to a high school that had a 4th whites, 4th blacks, a 4th Asians, and a 4th Mexicans.
Is that
almost.
right?
Washington
Wow.
was that way because it was an open school. And I didn't feel it there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was completely naive to it.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear it around me, I didn't feel it.
And none of the students reacted against it.
Uh-huh, yeah.
So in the 50s and 60s, when civil rights first started, what was your reaction to that?
Well, it was in the, I guess those marches were in the 60s. And I read about them, and even then, I just, you know, hoped that something would come of it. But I remember reading later things that really impressed me. I think it was in a story rather than in a news report. This black family, like a daughter and a father and mother, and she was saying why they could stop at any hotel now, and they didn't have to hunt for a place at which they could go. And I remember hearing later how in the hotels in San Francisco where you had the black entertainers, how they had to go and use the freight elevators to get upstairs or get to the stage or whatever. They wouldn't dare use the elevator that the guests would use. See, and in those days they just had to use another entrance. They had to go up in a freight elevator. And that, when I heard things like that, of course, that was very distressing. And then I remember hearing about there were German prisoners of war. And see, I didn't even realize that the armed services were segregated at the time, early on, you know, that they had, and some of the guards of these German prisoners of war were black. And they were down south someplace. The prisoners of war, Germans, could go into this restaurant, but the American soldiers couldn't go. You see, and now this was in the 40s, and when I would hear things like this, of course, it would really upset me. I mean, I could.
eyes were opened in 1963, the year Kennedy was shot. We went to live in Texas that year, and I went to Penny's the first week I was there. And I went with a woman who was my age. We were both young. She was a native. We went to Penny's, and I needed to use the restroom, so we headed to she told me I was at the back of the store, and we started walking there. I got there, and it was men, women, and colored, and I was stunned. It was naive I was. I thought, oh yeah, well that happened 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just froze. And I started sputtering and everything. I was just telling Dana recently, I just couldn't get over it. And I said, just to make a point, I said, well then I'm going to use the color to this group. And she panicked. She started sputtering. You can't do that. We're going to get into trouble. We'll get beat up and blah, blah, blah. So I said, don't forget it, and walked out of the store. And the 3 drinking fountains. And I thought the days...
Yeah, they were long since gone, yeah. Right.
They had whole towns where the black people could live. Not in your town. They had their own towns in Texas.
So in California, you were fairly untouched by a lot of the
See,
problems, but
well, early on,
right.
because there weren't that many black people living here. There were lots of Chinese, and I remember, now see, in Tonopah, when I was just in grade school, we had a few Chinese, they were laundry operators is what they were. Well, it was fine with me. I didn't pay any attention, didn't think about what their life was like or some of the situations they had encountered earlier. But later on, you see, when I learned that they had been imported to do all the work on the railroads, and then they were just thrown out. And they were run out of town. They were forced to go into the desert with nothing. They had to just starve and die, and that was that. And it was just so upsetting to me to learn about this. And something else, well, anyway, but along that same line, it was, I remember I have these good friends, and I just never realized they were so for discrimination, you know. But they just couldn't stand the thought of being near a black person. And this fellow had been in the service in the South Pacific. This was Polly's husband. Did you ever meet her? Did you know her?
I remember hearing about Polly. I don't know if I ever met her.
Anyway, he said his unit was slogging along in the rain and the muck in one of the South Pacific Islands, and some trucks went by full of black soldiers. And they were riding, see? And he was saying, now, you know, how come that can happen? And I said, well, if it weren't integrated, there'd have been some of both, you see. Some blacks would be down where you were, and some of you had been up there. It would have been mixed up. Well, he had to agree to that. But it was just so ingrained in them to feel they're so inferior that they've got to have the dregs, you know. And was the same age. He was born in November, and you were born in August.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Politics.
McCarthy.
Oh, McCarthyism? Did you?
Oh, yes, I sure lived through that, and that was in the 50s, I think,
Right.
wasn't it? And I hadn't really gotten to where I get worked up the way I do now, you know. But I do remember that, and I remember how delighted I was with Edward Murrow when he finally showed him up, you know, and it came to an end. And I've seen it a couple of times since, and I thought, how could anybody like McCarthy, you know, do such a thing? How could he put the fear into so many people without any foundation? It just can't, it's so hard to believe. And actually, I learned later of people I knew, I didn't know at the time, who were blacklisted because of him, you know, because they had had some connection with maybe not a communist organization, but as a
union?
outspoken
Radical.
sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just unbelievable that something like that could have happened in this country. But I believe it.
Yeah. So how did the feminist movement affect you? What did you think of that?
Well, of course, I was very disappointed when the Equal Rights Amendment didn't pass the states. You know, it did come out of Congress. Both houses passed it. But it's very, again, I don't know if disgusting is the word, amazing, that there are so many people in this country who still have the mentality that in the legislatures in the other states, you see, who felt, well, women just can't, they can't act like this. They've got to, I don't know what the reason is, you know, and why they're doing it.
I think religion plays a big part in it. Religious ideas.
Yeah, because of course, so many of the religions, women have to, well, of course, in the Arab religion, women have to, in the Jewish religion, women sit in separate sections. They don't join in with the men, and some of that's carried over into our Puritan background, I guess. But and then there's Phyllis Schlafly, who sends me up the wall whenever I read or hear what she has to say. But it's coming. I mean, and of course, as where I'm concerned, you know, I didn't feel it personally because I really was on an equal in the work that I had. And it's hard for me to still believe that women find this problem, but I know it exists, and slowly but surely I think it's dissolving. And there's lots of women in the higher jobs in private industry. But this is why so many women who were attorneys would go into civil service, you see, because they weren't able to get the jobs in private industry that they might have. And so there's a lot
Even
of,
though they may have preferred private industry at the time.
oh,
That's what's
sure.
sad.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. But they to really advance in their profession and to really have a job. And of course, we see Marcia Clark now in the present trial. So, and there are apparently quite lots of women in civil service now as attorneys and doctors.
So, you know, I'm curious more about Tonopah. What it was like growing up there, like the social side of it.
What's that?
The,
Oh, it's off, yeah, I was recording a program. Well, and I've got a little book up there I should let you take home and read. It was a little bit before my time, but this is a woman, it's called Lady in Boomtown, and she went as an 18-year-old bride. Her husband was he was an engineer, or he was an attorney. He was an attorney, and he was going to be working for one of the mining companies there. Let me start again a little bit. This is one of the first times, I think, that mining companies, well, they needed electricity, let's say, because they're going to sink these shafts. They're going to run the mill. And their electricity was just coming into being as a, you know, because otherwise in that country, you know, they didn't have it. But they had to string the poles and wires over these high mountains to get the electricity in, because this Tonopah was just down with mountains on both sides and no other hamlets, no other towns, no other cities in the area where electricity had existed. Reno and Las Vegas, apparently. Reno especially. I don't think Las Vegas even existed. But they had to bring it in over the mountains, and there was a lot of problems with establishing land ownership for these claims for the ore that supposedly was under there, and as to how far down, if you own the surface, how far down do you own what's underneath, you see. And,
Me either.
so anyway, there was a lot of work for attorneys to do and that sort of thing. So this woman went as a young bride from quite a well-to-do home in San Francisco, and it's just extremely interesting to read the experiences. And water had to be trucked in, not trucked, I mean, but hauled in. No, of course, no inside plumbing. Nobody had inside plumbing. But she tried to do her laundry. They'd set up big tubs, and then they'd put the hot water in the one and then cool it off and have more water here to rinse, and then rub on the board, rub the skin off your knuckles. She couldn't do it. So they had some money, see. So what she did, she bought a lot of extra sheets.
Like 2 transfers. Get all the way across town on Union Street. That's 79. Okay. A guitar lesson.
I don't see you seeing prices seatbelts.